Let's continue to work with our custom theme. This is the third part of designing a custom theme in WordPress from scratch. As I mentioned, we are going to continue to work on our theme. We will be focusing on additional ways that we can augment the Theme.json file, specifically so we can get the WordPress editor to give us more options so that we can start designing using our site tools. At present, if we go into the editor and we try to access any of our CSS styles, we are fairly limited. We basically only have options to change the text color, the background color, and we have some minimal options regarding text. What we want to do is we want to augment these things so that we can customize this fully. In addition, I want to bring in my own default color panel, and I ultimately would like to get rid of this default color panel. So these are the things that we're going to be working towards. Before we jump in and start coding, I did want to review a few things regarding Theme.json. The Theme.json file controls and configures your entire theme in one centralized location. It tells WordPress what design tools to show, things like the color picker, font controls, padding, margins, etc. What default styles your block and site should have, what template or template parts like header and footer should be included, what custom color palettes, fonts, and settings are available, and how to style blocks consistently without needing a ton of custom CSS. You can think of Theme.json as the brain of your block theme. Without it, WordPress falls back to its own boring default styles. You miss out on cool stuff like global colors, typography control, spacing, etc. Theme.json is how you register, style, and control your block theme globally. You do this so you don't have to manually style every block or every page individually. Understanding the structure of JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON, is key to working with it, as it is used for data interchange in many web technologies, including WordPress. Let's break down the curly braces, the square brackets, and other syntax that are used in a JSON file. Curly braces are used for object notation. They define an object in JSON. An object is essentially a collection of key value pairs, where each key is a string and each value can be any valid JSON type. This would include string, number, array, Boolean, etc. Square brackets are used for array notation. This is how we define arrays in a JSON file. An array is an ordered list of values. Values in an array can be of any valid JSON type, and they are separated by commas. We use commas as separators. This is how we separate items in an object or an array. The last item does not need a trailing comma, but adding one, while not causing an error in JavaScript, is not allowed in strict JSON syntax. Finally, we have key value pairs. Each key is always a string, and it's paired with a value using a colon. This is how JSON represents data. The main data types in JSON are strings, numbers, and Booleans. String values are enclosed in double quotes. Numbers, these are values such as 2 or 3.14, they are never enclosed inside of quotes. And Boolean values are written as true or false without quotes. You can see in my example, isActive is set to a Boolean of true, count is set to a numeric value of 5, and user is set to a string value of Alice. Here's a quick summary of how we use braces and notation in JSON. Keep in mind that a curly brace always represents an object. Objects represented with key value pairs. The square brackets represent arrays. These are simply ordered lists of values. The colon is used to separate keys and values in objects. And the comma is used to separate multiple items. These can either be objects or array elements. In the Theme.json file for WordPress, The main categories or sections used to configure and control the theme settings, styles, and structures include the following. We have schema. This defines the schema that validates the structure of the theme.json file. It ensures that the file is in the correct format, enabling WordPress to interpret the settings and apply them correctly. The version specifies the version of the theme.json schema being used. This helps WordPress to understand how to process the file and which features are available. The settings section defines various global settings that affect how the theme behaves and how users can customize it in the WordPress site editor. Common subcategories within settings include the appearance tools. These control whether the appearance tools are enabled for customizations, color, which defines the color palette for the theme, typography, which configures font families, font sizes, and other typography-related settings, spacing, which specifies the available units for spacing. This is generally padding and margin, and whether they can be customized or not. Border, this allows customization of borders. We can control things like color, width, style, and radius. Shadow, this defines shadow settings for elements. And dimensions, which configures the ability to adjust element dimensions. The styles section is used to define default styles for various aspects of a theme, such as typography, colors, and layout. The common subcategories for both styles and settings are almost identical. Another main category is template parts. This section defines reusable parts of the theme that can be inserted into templates. These are typically things like header, footer, and sidebar. Each template part is registered here and made available for use in the theme editor. The block section allows you to configure block level settings for various default blocks. These are typically things like paragraphs, post title, or groups. These settings control how blocks behave within the theme and what customizations are available in the editor. We also have a custom category. Inside the settings and styles sections, the custom flag can be used to enable or disable the ability for users to add their own custom values for a particular setting. This allows users to input their own custom colors, typography, or other styles if custom is set to true. And finally, we have presets. This is used within certain settings, things like shadows, where you can define preset values that users can choose from. These are pre-configured options, making it easy for users to apply standard shadow effects. Each section and setting helps define the overall look and functionality of your theme, and these can easily be customized within the WordPress block editor or site editor. Now that we have an overview of how the JSON file is going to function within our project, let's go ahead and augment our JSON file so we can add some more customization options within our site editor. Here I have our theme.json file open. We're going to go ahead and we're going to add some additional sections here. As you can see, I'm already using template parts. This is how we pulled in our header template that we did in the last exercise. What we're going to do here is we're going to augment this code so we can add some additional settings. I'm going to go ahead and deal with my settings. So I will place these in between version and template parts. There isn't a specified order that you have to set these things up, but I like to typically do these in the same sort of order to avoid confusion later on. I'm going to go ahead and add a comma after the closing curly brace on settings. Because I'm going to include quite a few things inside of settings, I want to make sure that I don't negate or have any problems with my template parts. The first thing that we're going to start off with is we're going to set our appearance tools to true. So if I simply add this line of code and we save our JSON file and go into WordPress and refresh our page, you will see if I grab my styles option, I now have a bunch more styles that weren't available before. So now I can add a background image. I have the same typography settings available, but in addition to those, I also have padding, margin, block spacing, minimum height, border, and shadow. And those things were not present until we told the appearance tools to be true. I'll go ahead and place a comma after true, and then we're going to pass in another key value pair. This is going to be for color, and this is going to be an object, so I will open my curly braces. And what we're going to do is we are going to turn off the default palette. We do this by typing default palette and then set the value to false. Once again, if we save our page and jump back into the front end portion of WordPress, before I refresh, I'm just going to show you that this was the default palette. However, if I refresh my page now and we go ahead and highlight something that will allow us to augment the colors, you can see that we no longer have a default palette. We can still use the color picker and pick a color, but it is nice to have a working palette that you can use within your project. So let's go ahead and set a default palette for our project that we can use within WordPress. I'm going to put a comma here, and then we'll go ahead and add the key of palette. Palette is a list or an array. That's why we're using the square braces, and we're going to include the colors that we're offering to our site editors. Each color inside the palette is an object, and typically the object is going to contain the following 3 properties. We're going to add slug, and we have to define a value for slug. Slug is simply a short machine-readable name. It contains no spaces, and WordPress uses this internally. You can think of this as an ID. I'm going to assign a value of neutral. The next key that I'm going to include is going to be color. Then I'm going to go ahead and assign a color value. I have to put this inside of quotes because it is a hex value. We'll put a comma after this, and then the last one is going to be the name. Name is going to be a human readable name that will show up in the WordPress interface. Inside of the quotes, you can go ahead and use the same value that you used for the slug, or you can use something completely different. This is basically what I'm going to do. I'm just going to repeat this process, and I'm going to add 4 additional colors. I'll put a comma, and then I'll go ahead and add those into my code. As you can see, I've just added a couple of other colors, and they follow the same formatting. The final thing that I want to make sure that I do here is add a comma after the closing square brace. That's because I'm adding additional information after this particular array. Let's add a default gradient so that we can see what that looks like. I'm going to add my comma so I don't forget. And we're going to follow the same formatting that we did before. I'll open the curly braces, and inside the curly braces, I'll pass in my key value pairs. Now that I have the gradient specified, I'm just going to add a few more sections to our Theme.json file. These last 3 values that I have in here are controlling what kind of color options the user can use in the WordPress editor. When I specify custom and set this to true, it allows users to pick any custom color, not just the ones from our color palette. So if we had set this to false, then the users would not have the ability to be able to pick their own colors. Link to true is going to enable the user to change the link color for things like buttons or text-based links. And background true is going to allow users to set the background color on any block. So what we're doing here is we're allowing users in the editor to choose any color that they want, not just use the theme colors. They'll be able to customize their links and set background colors on various blocks. Let's save our theme.json file and see what this looks like in our browser. I'm going to refresh my page. And once again, if I open up one of the block elements that allows me to control these things and go to styles, if we click on background, you can see that I have my own custom theme colors available. If I hover over these, the name that I assigned in the theme.json file is going to show up. If we go to gradient, here is the theme gradient that we specified. I did not get rid of the default gradient, so they are still showing. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how we can begin to go about customizing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the group that is my header, And actually, let's do this inside of the header, not the template. So I'm going to go into patterns. I'll go into header, and we're just going to edit the header. Here's the main group. I'm going to go ahead and go to the style tab, and then we can start to modify this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set a background, and I'm going to use that custom gradient that we specified. I can adjust the direction of the gradient using this slider, but I'm going to leave this at the default angle. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a background image as well. And in my media library, I have an image that is partially transparent. I'm going to use this to set a more scaled background. Now, when we do this, it doesn't show up here, but if we save and we go to the front end portion of WordPress and refresh, you can see that it also isn't showing up. So let's go ahead and inspect this area. This is our header right here. And if we look, you can see that this is the background gradient. If I turn off background image, we do see that. But the way in which WordPress applies these things, the background image is going to overwrite that. So the best thing to do here is that what we want to do is we're going to target this element using CSS. I'll go into the back end and I'm just going to clear out this image. We'll save our page. And now if we refresh, you're going to see the background gradient that we inserted. Then what we'll do is we're going to go into our folder that contains our custom theme. I'm simply going to make a new folder here, and I'm going to call this images. And I'm going to just put my background image inside of this folder. This will allow me to target it with CSS. Now if we go into our code editor, and I'm going to go into style.css, before I do that, let's just assign a quick custom class to this group. I'm going to select the group. I'll go to block and advanced, and I'm just going to add an additional class. We'll call this main header. I'll save this, and if we refresh the front end portion of WordPress, you can see that our new class of main header is being applied. At this point, I can use that as a selector. I'm going to use the property of background image URL, and because I'm pulling this from my custom theme, I'm just going to go into images and find the image. I'll place a semicolon here. And in order for these styles to be pulled in, we're going to need to enqueue them. So I'm going to go into my functions file, and inside my PHP block, we'll add some code to enqueue our CSS. We've gone through this code before. What I'm basically doing here is I'm adding this code to my functions file. We're creating a function called mar theme enqueue styles. Then we're going to go ahead and we're using the WP enqueue style built-in function. We're going to assign this a handle. We can name it anything we want. We're going to use get style sheet URI, which is going to point to our style.css file. Typically, you may have an array. If you don't have any dependencies, you can leave this empty. And then I'm using this last line of code, which will help with cache busting. Finally, I'm using the add action hook to call this particular style. If we save this now and we go back to the front end portion of WordPress and refresh our page, you're going to see that the background image is being pulled in from our styles. Here is the rule. It just happens to be overwritten by this rule right here. And you can see that this has primary gradient background, has an important modifier, so it is going to trump what we have written right here on our header. I did want to mention that part of this conflict is that gradients use the same CSS property as background images, so these are conflicting with each other. It is possible with CSS to add both of these. I can show you what that looks like really quickly. If we go back into our code editor, and after my background image URL, I'm going to put a comma, and then I'm going to add in the linear gradient. If we save this now, and I go back to WordPress front end and refresh, you can see that here is my rule. And if I disable this, we actually see the image and the background gradient. So this would work, but it's being overwritten by this important modifier. So we have a couple choices here. We could use important as well, which is going to override that. Or in this case, if this is really my intention, I would probably just go into the backend portion of WordPress and get rid of this background gradient altogether. If we clear this out and save this, then we don't have to worry about using the important modifier or changing our CSS. It's going to work perfectly. So if this is my ultimate intention, I could do something like this. I did want to also show you really quickly, if we weren't using the gradient background, if I just keep this as the background image in my custom CSS, and let's just say in WordPress, I just set the background to be a solid color and saved it. If you look in the front end, when I refresh, my background image is going to show up in this way as well. I do want to use the gradient as well as the background image, so I'm going to revert back to the example that I just showed you. I'll add in my additional CSS, and then inside of WordPress, I'm simply going to remove the background color altogether. This will not show up in the WordPress editor, but in the front end of WordPress, we will see our changes being applied. And now that we've made some of these additional options available, we can add padding to the top and the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do that so that my text has a little bit more breathing room. And the other thing that I don't really need at this point is the site title, because my logo contains the site title. So I'm going to simply select this and just delete it to get rid of that. And if we save this now and we come back to the front end, you can see that it shows my logo, our custom background, and then we have our tagline showing. We are going to want to modify the fonts and some additional things on our header. We need to add some more code to our JSON, so we'll be working on that next. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how powerful the theme.json file is and how we can really use it to customize the experience that the admin or whoever is editing your website is going to have when they are making changes to the website.